Society offers us a very specific, heavily endorsed blueprint for financial success. To understand how this works, we have to look at this matrix of the three competing economic archetypes that dictate financial outcomes. DeMarco categorizes these as the Sidewalk, the Slowlane, and the Fastlane. These are not personality types. Each path is governed by a strict, deterministic mathematical equation that either permanently caps or accelerates your wealth potential. Evaluating finance through these mathematical equations strips away the emotion and marketing surrounding traditional career advice. It exposes the structural limits of how we are taught to earn a living. Looking at the first column, the Sidewalk archetype represents an economic profile driven entirely by instant gratification. There is zero long-term financial planning here. The entire system is summarized by the equation: wealth equals income plus debt. Under this model, debt is weaponized for immediate consumption. Capital flows directly into depreciating assets, like clothes, cars, and vacations, forcing expenses to constantly rise and match whatever income is generated. This creates what DeMarco calls the income illusion. High cash flow gives the appearance of wealth, while completely masking systemic insolvency beneath the surface. Even professional athletes or high-powered executives earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a month are vulnerable to this trap. If their expenses scale exactly with their income, they are mathematically operating on the sidewalk. The defining characteristic of this equation is extreme fragility. Because there is no systemic growth or capital reserve, a single macroeconomic shock, a medical emergency, or a sudden loss of employment collapses the entire system immediately. The behavior of a sidewalker reflects this short-term design. Time is treated as infinite. Education stops the day of graduation. Wealth is viewed as a lottery-like event, landing a massive contract or catching a lucky break, rather than a calculated process. Because the math demands that money exits the system as quickly as it enters, the sidewalk equation is predisposed to poverty, regardless of the absolute dollar amount flowing through it. Moving to the second column, the slow lane is the domain of the traditional middle class. The central strategy here is sacrificing today's quality of life for a secure, distant tomorrow. The equation driving this is wealth equals intrinsic value, derived from a job, plus compound interest from market investments. Looking closely at the intrinsic value variable, it is calculated simply: your hourly wage multiplied by the hours you work, or a fixed yearly salary. This introduces an absolute mathematical cap on your earning potential. Your input is strictly limited to 24 hours a day, and an employer ultimately dictates the maximum value of that time. To compensate for this ceiling, the slow lane relies on the second variable, compound interest. This requires funneling a portion of that capped income into the stock market and relying on consistent returns over 4 decades. This assumption carries immense hidden risks. Inflation, market crashes, or unexpected corporate layoffs can easily destroy years of disciplined savings, leaving the outcome entirely outside the individual's control. To sustain this equation, the slow laner accepts the 5-for-2 trade. They forfeit 5 days of active labor for 2 days of weekend autonomy, repeatedly for their entire adult life. When your wealth is dictated by employers, market fluctuations, and the physical limits of time, the outcome naturally skews toward financial mediocrity. DeMarco illustrates this mechanical difference using an Egyptian parable. A pharaoh tasks his 2 18-year-old nephews, Azor and Chuma, with building identical pyramids to win kingship and lifelong luxury. Azor takes the slow lane approach. He immediately gets to work, relying on manual labor to drag heavy stones one by one across the sand to form the base. As the pyramid grows, the stones become too heavy to lift. Azor's solution is to increase his intrinsic value. He hires a strong man to train him, building more muscle so he can lift heavier stones. Chuma takes the Fastlane approach. For 3 full years, he doesn't move a single stone. Instead, he locks himself in a barn and engineers a complex machine involving levers, wheels, and ropes. When Chuma brings his machine to the site, it operates 30 times faster. What took Azor 2 months, Chuma accomplishes in 2 days. The metaphor highlights a mechanical necessity. The fast lane requires an industrial revolution of your personal wealth process. You must replace manual, linear labor with a mechanized system. Hard work is required in both lanes, but effort alone is insufficient. To generate outsized returns, that effort must be focused exclusively on building leverage rather than executing repetitive labor. This brings us to the final column, the Fastlane. This is a strategic environment explicitly designed for rapid wealth creation and extreme lifestyle autonomy. The equation governing this architecture is wealth equals net profit plus asset value. The defining characteristic of this equation is controllable unlimited leverage. Unlike an hourly wage, both net profit and asset value have no theoretical mathematical cap. They can scale infinitely. Unlocking this leverage requires a permanent psychological shift. You have to transition your primary identity from a consumer to a producer. Instead of buying products on television, a producer sells them. Instead of digging for gold, a producer sells the shovels. Instead of watching videos online, a producer creates the media. This requires strict control over your environment. DeMarco proved this by abandoning a depressive job market in Chicago, actively choosing to relocate to Phoenix, specifically to engineer an environment conducive to building his business. The ultimate goal of the producer is to permanently divorce time from income. They build a money tree, a system that generates revenue completely independent of their physical presence. Adopting this producer mindset is the mandatory prerequisite for accessing the mathematics of exponential wealth. That simply starting a business does not automatically place you in the fast lane. Many entrepreneurial ventures are just poorly structured slow-lane jobs in disguise. To evaluate if a business architecture can actually scale, DeMarco uses the sense framework, shown here: control, entry, need, time, and scale. Let's start with control. The commandment of control asks a simple question: are you the driver of the business or merely a hitchhiker on someone else's platform? Models like affiliate marketing or dropshipping often violate this commandment. When you rely entirely on an external parent company, a single algorithm update or policy change can instantly destroy your entire revenue stream. Next is the commandment of entry, which analyzes the barrier to market participation. If anyone can buy a cheap kit or launch a blog in an hour, hypersaturation is guaranteed. Exceptional execution is required to survive. Without strict control over the platform and high barriers to entry, a business is mathematically defenseless against endless competition and sudden external disruption. The third requirement is the commandment of need. The market is entirely apathetic to a founder's personal passions. It only transfers capital in exchange for solved problems. Consider a martial arts expert who opens a local dojo simply to do what he loves. If he ignores genuine neighborhood demand and existing competition, his project will fail. Following your passion is fatal if it ignores the economic reality of market need. Fourth is the commandment of time. This is the ultimate test of whether the business can operate systematically in the founder's absence. A founder might open a highly profitable independent coffee shop, but if keeping the doors open traps her in a 16-hour daily tether, she hasn't built a business. She has built a high-stress job that violates the time commandment. Finally, the commandment of scale. This introduces the law of effection. To make millions, you must impact millions, either through mass volume or high pricing magnitude. A local sandwich shop faces a hard geographical limit on its daily volume. Contrast that with a digital application, which possesses the infrastructure to scale to millions of users worldwide with the exact same core product. A business failing any of these sense criteria restricts controllable unlimited leverage. When growth is artificially capped, the architecture is effectively downgraded right back to the slow lane. To successfully satisfy the sense framework, specifically time and scale, founders construct their architecture using one of 5 specific business systems. The first is computer and software systems. Code written once can be replicated and deployed to millions of users globally with near zero marginal cost. The second is distribution systems. These are networks, franchises, or platforms designed specifically to move products to massive audiences with maximum efficiency. The third is content systems. Information assets such as books, educational courses, or digital media survive time and generate repeat royalties long after the initial labor is finished. Fourth are human resource systems. This involves utilizing management frameworks and employees to scale operations. It is complex to manage, but highly scalable when executed correctly. The fifth and final structure is rental systems, licensing intellectual property, owning digital real estate, or leasing physical property generates entirely passive, recurring revenue. These 5 architectures are the only proven mechanical structures capable of permanently decoupling human time from income generation. Looking at the comparative analysis, the outcomes are deterministic. The Sidewalk guarantees poverty, the Slowlane guarantees mediocrity. Only the Fastlane offers a valid mathematical path to rapid wealth, but escaping the Slowlane requires front-loading the effort. Fastlane founders accept the 7-for-0 labor trade. They willingly work 7 days a week in the short term to engineer a system that allows them to work 0 days a week for decades. Bridging the gap between theory and execution means defeating the enemies of speed, perfectionism, analysis paralysis, and over-planning. Capital providers and banks fund market traction, not theoretical business plans. True execution relies on the feedback loop of success: act, fail, learn, adjust, and repeat. Real-world market feedback is the only valid metric to test the commandment of need. Instagram survived exclusively by relying on this feedback loop, reading user data to pivot rapidly from a failing location check-in app into a dominant photo-sharing network. Wealth is not an overnight event to be won. Instead, it is a systemic process to be engineered. To escape the linear constraints of time, you must permanently shift your identity from consumer to producer, rigorously audit your architecture against the sense framework, and build systems that